Hi, welcome to the video on how to get started with these challenge problems. So this video is for those folks who have already done the density extra practice and you want to challenge. So in all of these challenge problems, the ones that you see, the first four that you see and then the last four that you see, the main challenge is, unlike the previous problems where you were given sort of the mass, the volume, and the density, you didn't have to do anything to calculate. Right? They just gave you the mass and the volume, etc., right? And you just had to calculate for your unknown. Here, you have to calculate the volumes or determine the volumes first. So you'll notice in all these problems it says, what is the volume? What is the volume? And once you have the volume, you'll use your mass and the volume that you have to solve for the density. So that part is pretty easy, but we need to get to the volume. Now, there are two ways that you're going to solve for volume. The first way you probably have already seen in math, and that is using the geometric formula that volume is equal to length times width times height. All right, so remember, it's length times width times height. And you use that for something that's a cube or a rectangular prism. The difference between a cube and a rectangular prism is that a cube, all three sides, the length, width, and height will be equal. And for a rectangular prism, they're not necessarily equal. Okay, so to get started on a problem like this, first thing is you want to calculate the volume, and all you need to do for that is do volume is equal to length times width times height. That's it. And of course, you'll plug in your numbers. So for my length, I'll plug in 2. So I'm going to drop my volume down. Volume is equal to 2. For my width, I'm going to plug in my 3, so 2 times 3. And for my height, I'll plug in the 4. So what I have here for my volume is 2 times 3 times 4. Okay? And that gives me a volume of 24. Okay. I have a nice number here, but what about my units? Remember, we always need to do units. So the other thing about when you're calculating volume, notice that the numbers multiply, you multiply all the numbers together. You're also going to multiply all the units together. And I'll show you this here on the side. So the units for each of these, for the length and the width and height, they're all the same, and they should be. They should be the same units. They're all centimeters. So that's centimeter times centimeter times centimeter. We're multiplying them 3 times, just like we did with the numbers. And then that gives me centimeters cubed. Because remember, whenever you multiply anything by itself twice, that's squared. But if you multiply anything by itself 3 times, that's cubed. So that means the units here are centimeters cubed. Okay? So now you have your volume, and you can plug that in, 24 centimeter cubed. Cool. Once you have your volume, so you know the volume is 24 centimeter cubed, you have the mass. So going back to, if you're using the triangle method, DMV, right? So with that, if you're calculating the density is going to be mass over volume, okay? So we're going to do density is equal to mass over volume. So now what you can do is plug in your volume, because you got that now, is 24. All right, density equals. And the mass is up top here, it's 48. So 48 divided by 24 gives you a value of 2. And then for your units, remember, it's the mass unit over the volume unit. So it's going to be grams per centimeter cube. Okay. So that's it. So the steps are to solve for the volume first. So for this one, it's volume is equal to length times width times height. So that means multiplying these numbers together. And then don't forget that your units for volume are going to be centimeter cube. Okay? And once you have that, you can solve for the density. All right, that's the first set of challenge problems. So if you want to get started on those and then pause the video, in a moment I'll show you how to do the last set. Okay, so for the last set of challenge problems, in this case what you're doing is you're using what's called a displacement method. Now for the displacement method, what you have here is you have some water. Let's say you have some water here. And your water, the volume of the water, this is called a graduated cylinder. It measures volume. And the volume of the water right now is 45 milliliters. Okay. Then you notice in the second picture, it's a little different because in the second picture, you dropped in this object, like you dropped a star, this star in, that's your object, into the water. Now what happened to the water level? It rose up, right? And if you compare the numbers, it started off at 45, the volume of the water, and then it rose up to 50. So that means that the difference that it rose up is 5 milliliters, okay? And that 5 milliliters comes from the star. That means the star is 5 milliliters, okay? So how would you calculate that? I just did that sort of conceptually. The way that you do it conceptually is the volume, in this case, when you're using these graduated cylinders in what's called the displacement method, is the final water level minus the starting water level. So V is going to equal V final, so this is my V final, minus V initial. You took the difference. So when you do subtraction, you're taking the difference. So volume is equal to 50, my final, minus starting 45. Pretty easy, right? And if you plug that in your calculator, that's going to give you 5 milliliters. So you can either do it using the math equation or you can do it conceptually by looking and comparing the two and seeing how much the water level rose. That will be the volume of the object. All right, so that means we know the volume is 5 milliliters. And once you know that the volume is 5 milliliters, then you can calculate the density. And once again, you would use the DMV if you want, or of course you can always use the just algebra skills, which I've showed you in the previous video. Okay, so that's it. You're going to calculate the volume for these by subtracting them, final minus initial, and then once you have your volume and the mass is up here, you would solve for the density using that. All right, hope you found this video helpful. Have a quality day.